Okay, Steve, we are back and looking forward to, I guess we're calling this part two of Bohm 2. We're going through a Bohm Bergson comparison integration. And we got a lot done. Yes,
Right.
moving through very important notions. So now we'll just pick it up where we left off and you can just take it away.
We're picking up from just previous discussion on Bohm and the generative order versus Bergson. And so now we're to another topic that you want to take a look at,
Right.
namely pulses, stable subtotalities, and Bohm's framework or phraseology. Whitehead, we're going to be looking at epochs, Capek's notion of pulses, etc. So
Good.
now I have a nice quote here. Actually, it's from Bohm, I think. Yeah. At a given moment, a certain note is being played, but a number of previous notes are still reverberating in consciousness. Close attention will show that it is the simultaneous presence and activity of all these reverberations that is responsible for direct and immediately felt sense of movement, flow, and continuity. So that's from Implicate Order, Wholeness and Implicate Order.
Okay.
Now, what I'm kind of noting here, he is assuming consciousness here, the indivisible flow or indivisible transformation of the holographic field. This is the source of the movement. You don't have to make movement out of order, okay? Which is what he's implying here. Um,
Okay.
so, first comment. Again, here for Bohm, motion is not primary. Rather, it's order. It is needed to account for motion.
That's right.
He he notes. So actually, we're kind of just continuing on from the previous subject. He notes his concept that consciousness can be described as a series of moments. Now we're getting to the moments. A moment covers a somewhat variable extended period of duration, he says, to quote him. So the moment can be of various extents in time, but we've got the moments, and is experienced directly in the implicate order, uh, which is a interesting statement because it's experienced directly in the implicate order, but we only experience at least see the explicit order. So I don't quite understand that uh,
Yeah, that's
statement, but he says it. He declares this is closer to Whitehead's occasions as opposed to Leibniz in his monad. So I'm not even going to comment on that because actually I don't. Now that I look at it, I put it there. I don't know what he meant, but I understand what he means by it. It's close to Whitehead's occasions or epochs, this variable, this moments of duration. So my comment, the conversion of time to a series of epochs, moments, drops. This is a philosophical favorite. Uh, there's even an argument that you put me on that we need to treat Bergson's time, his duration, as pulsational waves. And I've got this article here from Schmidtke on Bergson and the pulsational wave model of temporality, but you pointed out that this already started with Capek
Gunter.
in at least 1971, if I recall the um, the date. I might have that date wrong for Capek, but this is more from Capek than from Schmidtke. But to me, this all misses the fundamentals. That the transformation of the holographic field is an indivisible flow. Uh, and to try to make that indivisible flow into drops or moments or epochs that jerk along, and that in the Whitehead version, that was, as I talked about in number 53 my video series, that is particularly apparent that he has no he has no method of gluing together the epochs. You have epoch one, then you jerk to epoch two, then you jerk to epoch three. In other words, these drops or moments, there's there's no way to account for how they are strung together. In fact, you're back to assuming the indivisibility of motion, where at best these things are then would be sort of, um, well, okay, pulses, I guess, in this indivisible motion, where there's no real discontinuity between one and the next. They bleed into each other. But do you really need them? I don't know. Again, I know motion is primary. Everything leads back to motion. The epochs, the pulsations, kind of collapse when taken concretely to perception. That is the concrete analysis of experience. Um, there's no principled method for ever defining epochs. It always just is sort of made up ad hoc as some theorist decides to say, okay, well, that's an epoch and that's an epoch. Like just looking at the coffee cup, is each 360-degree circle of that spoon an epoch? You know, one circle an epoch, two circles an epoch. What's an epoch in the coffee stirring? You know, or is the whole coffee stirring an epoch? Which then the epoch could be like if I choose to stir for 10 minutes, is that a 10-minute long epoch? You see where it starts to break down, you know, or look at that flow field as I drive down. What's an epoch there? As each tree goes by, is that an epoch? You know, or what if there's no trees? I mean, you know, what if it's just a desert road like Arizona? You know, uh, where would the epochs be in that? And if you drove for 2 hours, is that a 2 hour long epoch? What you see my point? There's no principled method of doing these epochs, and it sort of collapses when you look at Gibson's optical flows that characterize these events. So you're just struggling to to try to slap this epic notion on top of experience. And again, what's the time? What's the source of the time extent of the epic in the first place? If I have my epic is one 360-degree circle of that spoon, source of the continuity of seeing that is still the indivisible flow of the transformation of the or indivisible transformation of the universal field. So you see, my struggle with epics is just too artificial. It's just an imposed structure that these philosophers seem to love, but doesn't bias anything.
Mm-hmm.
Again, so I just anticipated that comment. what's the start end of an epic? How long does it extend? 1 minute, 10 minutes? No idea. And my little note here is that the suspicion behind the epic thing or the moment thing is this intuition that something is creating the cubes. Remember, we're back to the abstract space where each point along the motion of that cup is an instant in time, which corresponds then to an instant of the all of space, which I'm visualizing as a cube. So each cube would be an epic, you know, but then I have to have something that generates something continuous like my God there that generates the cubes with some time extent again. So you see my difficulty with this Bohmian pulsation thing.
Yeah.
Just doesn't buy much. I guess that's the bottom line. So whereas Bohm's leaning toward pulses comes from creating movement somehow out of a static order. Again, he's kind of got a static order there in those, you know, my three cubes as I pictured, but he's got to create it one at a time. But you know, something pulses the first cube, something pulses the second cube, something pulses the first cube. I think that's kind of where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I think Capix comes from Bergson. He's acutely aware that there are no durationless instants. That is, there are no mathematical point instants. Again, as my picture in the last slide, there's the little red dots of on the trajectory of the cup. Those are instants, but logically, when you take it to the infinitely divisible end, they're durationless. They're mathematical point instants with no beginning and no end. So he says, thus, even physical duration contains a rudiment of memory, that is, the condensation of the past in the present. Consequently, even physical moments, instead of durationless instants, are pulsations. So I'd simply question whether the indivisible flow of duration, this organic continuity, where each moment, as Bergson said, penetrates, it permeates the next. And he's just using moment because you have to use something like that because of language, because of
Right.
how language is sort of based spatially. And like the notes of a melody necessarily implies pulsations in its development. Again, I think not. I think, see, Capek in his writings, as I told you yesterday, just sells this idea that pulsations are a necessary consequence of Bergson's duration. And I say, no, not even close. Again,
Mhm.
notice by what I said, you're back to the, well, if it's so necessary, then why are you struggling to fit it to these flow fields? You know, why does it obviously become completely arbitrary and ad hoc as to how you apply a series of pulsations to get flowing down the road there, or stirring the coffee or eating the carrot? The concept is simply too bulky, too ill-defined to apply these to the environmental flows and perception.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that was my comment there
Well,
on
let's summarize a bit, and I really want to thank you for clarifying that for me, because as you know, this whole pulsation thing, whether it's through Capek or Bohm, it's been driving me nuts, because as I've said to you, most of the people I read who are critics of Bergson's work, other than you, I mean, I think you're the purist, because everybody else somehow or other goes back to those notions of pulsations, and they bring in, they try to integrate Bergson, Bohm, Whitehead. So I really appreciate what you shared there. And again, I think we discovered something yesterday. Let's kind of summarize a bit, because I think what we're learning is, as I've always thought, for Bohm, order was more fundamental than time. And for Bergson, time is more fundamental than order. And for Bergson, that order of time is in movement. And you're kind of saying, well, Bohm's notion of order is too static. And when you look at his overall frame of physics, or his work in quantum physics, where he's trying to tie in STR, it becomes a little bit incoherent, because he does have to account for movement. And for him, and I want to say, he used to always say that order is very fundamental. It's almost something that you cannot be defined. But he did say, if you could define it, he says something like, order is perception. Now, but this ties into his work with Krishnamurti, who they went on and on about how order is perception. And what's interesting about their work, we won't go into it here, but I just want to throw this out here, because again, as I've said to you before, I really think it's a sin that people who are looking at Bohm somehow or other try to avoid his interaction with Krishnamurti, which you just can't do.
that.
Krishnamurti
Well, that
was,
would be me.
oh, I mean, it's very common, though, very common. But I want to
Well,
say,
I didn't even know about it until you told me. So,
oh, really?
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Well, I mean, this whole, here's, let me just put this out there. When I first discovered your video series and you were talking about Bergson's notion of pure perception, I hadn't read any Bergson, but I had read a hell of a lot of Krishnamurti and Bohm, who used the phrase pure perception. Now, remember, you and I were writing back and forth. I'm like, hey, but the use of the term pure perception is just entirely different. And I want to make the point that for Krishnamurti and Bohm, and again, for Bohm, even order is perception. And Krishnamurti had this notion that perception can act. It has its own action. So I think Bohm, this is very influential in Bohm's work, that perception, order is perception. And somehow for these guys, perception has its own action. Which, by the way, this is called pure perception. That's a perception without memory. So again, very similar to Bergson, pure perception is perception without memory. And for Bohm and Krishnamurti, pure perception is perception without memory. But that pure perception for Bohm and Krishnamurti has its own action. Now, I'll leave it at that, because I know we need to move on to other topics, but that's a very important issue for Bohm. And I want, but you can see there, if you view order as perception, if you think that order as perception has its own action, now he's accounting for movement. But again, I think you would say that that's just a bit too abstract. There's no time scale there. There's no flow fields. There's no invariance. I get that. I understand that.
Right. And I'd have to look at why they say that perception has no action. It has vague resonances to Bergson's definition of perception as virtual action. Remember, perception is actually virtual action. I'm seeing how I can act on the holographic field in the
Yeah.
future. As we've talked, perception is actually the display of a past transformation of the universal field,
Mhm.
and simultaneously the display of how I can future act on the field, virtual action.
Yeah.
So in that sense, perception would have its own action. It's
Okay.
also
Gotcha.
what I just said is equivalent to Gibson's affordances, that I'm perceiving or what the coffee cup and the spoon are affording in terms of action. But whether they mean that or not, I kind of doubt it.
Yeah, no,
That's
they're
that's
coming.
what they mean.
No, they're coming at it from a more mystical. I'll just use the phrase mystical perspective. This is Krishnamurti's notion that.
All
But
right.
what you just said, but that whole notion of virtual action, that's very unique and very important and very powerful. That's just not in Bohm at all, you know.
Right.
But
True.
yeah, so there's some subtle differences and some subtle similarities as well.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Well, let's go to the next topic that you think is important, which I think is
Yeah,
too, but
yeah.
I tend to ignore it. That is the Susskind, and it's not just Susskind, there's a whole list of people, in the holographic principle of physics. And I'm noting here, in physics, the holographic principle is the holographic principle.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not Bohm's, which is interesting, and not Bergson's either. Its big names essentially start with Hawking, due to its origins in the black hole theory, and continue with Bekenstein, Tehuft, Susskind, Busso, Melicena, and others. And yes, before all, Shannon, the information theorist, because they all tie this back to the notion of information.
Yep.
So, at its heart, the holographic principle, there is a problem with this conception of information.
Bullseye.
The number two, this holographic principle, henceforth HP, is incompatible with Bergson. It's not, nor is it compatible with Bohm for that matter.
Oh, it is not. It is not.
Which is to say, the holographic principle can never support a theory of consciousness. And it thus involves a deep problem with physics. And then go back to one. And as hard as a problem of information theory. Okay. And so I'm going to spin this out a bit. In 2011, a talk discussing the holographic principle. We've got the great exponent thereof, Leonard Susskind. And he starts with this statement. It all began in thinking about black holes. For Leonard, in other words, it seems Bohm and certainly Bergson were lost in a black hole. They don't exist. Okay. It's amazing to say the holographic principle starts with black holes. I mean,
That's cool.
that's an amazing piece of ignorance right there, you know. Unless, of course, you think the only holographic principle is their holographic principle. So we're on a quite different road. He says that is, black holes are ubiquitous, and almost all the information in the universe exists in black holes. Amazing statement. What is information to them? Well, it's this. For Susskind, information comes in bits. And so he's got the sentence there. King Canute had warts on his chin. And we can translate that to Morse code there, dots and dashes, and we count them up to 65 bits. And I hit enter and nothing happened. There it goes. Or I could have Joe stirred the coffee, that would be 45 bits, which is describing that event there. Joe stirred the coffee 45 bits. Now you can already see the problem. If I'm viewing language as a modulating system to create the perception, internal, external, of an event, like coffee stirring, and that's the meaning, you're going to reduce that to 45 bits, that stirring the coffee there. See, we've already got a fundamental problem. So the information comes in bits, in discrete units. An example, the sentence, King Canute had warts in his chin, so I anticipated myself. The sentence expresses a certain amount of information. But physicists, information theorists, when they talk about information, they are not talking about the meaning of information. That is, I'm expressing what this guy is doing, stirring coffee. This meaning doesn't count. What counts is the symbols. So this will be an intrinsic problem. Bits cannot convey the physical dynamic information. There's invariance laws that describe or specify stirring coffee. I mentioned this before, the velocity flow fields, the adiabatic ratio, the ratio of energy of frequency to frequency of oscillation to the energy of oscillation. Inertial tensors involved there, acoustical invariances, all these texture gradient flows just doesn't exist in the physics world, which already tells you they're basically cut off from reality. Susskind now he discusses this minus first law of physics. It's more important than deeper than Newton's first two laws. Bits of information are indestructible, he says. And these indestructible bits of it exist on the surface of black holes. Now, this is an amazing statement, which we're going to rip into and destroy in a second. Here, fast forward to a 2014 discussion. We've got 4 heavy-duty physicists, to include Susskind there. So you got Boos-Overlin, 't Hooft, and Susskind. And they're contemplating what we've just seen Susskind talk about, the concept that all information for an object is encoded at the surface of the horizon of a black hole. Okay, back to the bits thing. And Brian Greene, who's, I think he was, no, he's not the moderator there, but they played a video of him, and he had stated, quote, that suggests that maybe this applies more broadly. Maybe the 3D object, the world around us, maybe all the information is smeared around a distant 2D surface that surrounds us. And we're just in some sense a holographic projection of that distant data. And that picture there in the right corner, we're talking about a 2D surface that projects a 3D world, physical world. I mean, your mind boggles when you think of how you're going to have to make what that transition implies from the bits to a 3D physical world of stirring the coffee. Okay. Now that's followed by Bekenstein, who says the holographic principle tells something astonishing, that our ideas of volume in the real world, in a sense, may just be a kind of an illusion. Now, this is because everything about this holographic principle is two-dimensional, a 2D flat surface. And of course, we live in a 3D, actually a 4D world. So if everything is just a 2D surface, well, then the 4D world is an illusion. They have no theory of the illusion, by the way, but that doesn't mean anything to them either. They're basically now theorists of consciousness in a subject where they actually don't really belong. So, I might be missing a transition here, but they're noting, they start in my little picture. They got all the little atoms running around in a box there. They start talking about the velocity, positions of velocities of particles, and they subtly transform these things into bits on the horizon of a black hole. Okay, and then Verlinde proposes we could reconstruct every object and event in the room. Okay, so interesting. I mean, we're back to my statement that you've got a flat horizon or flat surface, which you are now going to construct the whole 4-dimensional concrete physical reality. They think they can do this. An example up there, notice they're basically shining a reconstructive wave symbolized by my flashlight through that flat film surface and reconstructing the image, 3D image, so to speak, of a clown apparently smoking a cigar. So that's their model. Somehow we transition from 2D informational bits to a 4-dimensional concrete world. In other words, we could reconstruct the coffee stirring. How? Well, they never approach this. What physical process is going to physically reconstruct the coffee, the spoon, the person, the stirring from bits? Well, Susskind wisely backed off of this. He says, well, there isn't a magic flashlight. It's a mathematical process. Notice that. In other words, there is no ontology here, no actual physicality whatsoever. It's somehow they're creating all the reality from abstract mathematics. I mean, the absurdity is, gobsmacking, but this doesn't stop them. So let's look at bits. The 1 or 0 bit, abstract, immutable, eternal, static. Remember the minus first law of Susskind, indestructible. This is a purely conceptual abstract fiction. In concrete practice, all bits, even qubits, are complex circuits of multiple transistors with tight tolerances, something like voltage values, say 3 volts equals 0, 5 volts equal 1. God help you if you have 4.5 volts. It's not going to equal 1 or 0. There's a picture of representing 1 bit on a breadboard. All the transistors and switches needed to represent a bit. Or here's the Stone Age version, back to the old magnetic cores. Note all the wires and the switches and the turn. That's a bit. According to Susskind, bits just sit on black holes. What is he talking about? Here's pixel. He also talks about pixels. Well, look at the picture on the board just to represent 1 pixel. Okay.
Yeah.
A circuit is in constant motion to maintain the bit value. So Suss's hot bit soup is its own parody. It's an absolute parody. How do those bits just continue to exist there on the surface of a black hole? I mean, you have to be so delusional. It's almost amazing. Don't forget to shield those qubits. I mean, if you're going to keep qubits there, you better have them shielded in that black hole very nicely. There's an example of a shield. But so the qubits are even worse than bits, and we're going to look at that in a second. Here's the qubits. Now there's tons of realizations of qubits now. I mean, that you can find video after video where they're coming up with different versions of qubits. They don't know what to do with the qubits. That's another question, and we'll see why in a second. But here's one version that existed for a long time. It's actually, the qubit is realized as a classic LC circuit, where look at the picture that L is an inductor or a coil and C is a capacitor. And so what you're doing is, if you notice, you've got the capacitor and it's discharging and going upwards there with our current flow, then through a capacitor. Through the inductor, through the coil, and then back again. So this thing will begin to resonate, but gradually dissipate. Hopefully, I'm said that. I went too fast here, but let me go. If I can go back.
Sure.
Yeah. So this thing will sit there and resonate, so to speak, in a certain state, but it gradually dissipates due to the resistance in the circuit, et cetera, to 0. But until then, it basically discharges back and forth, back and forth. Then what you do is you add a Josephson junction. This is effectively a small resonant antenna. I've got the picture there to the right of my on the white block there. You see the Josephson junction, the little X there is inserted into that circuit. What that does is let you modulate the state of that LC circuit. So it allows communication basically to your qubit. Your qubit is the LC circuit. You can change the qubit state. So to communicate with or affect other qubits instantaneously via resonance with it. I can never pronounce Josephson junction. So you can basically modulate what level that LC circuit sits in. Again, there we have the gating of the qubit with the junction. And notice the picture there. This is from one of the courses that my other retired buddy and I looked at with on quantum computing. Noticed all the little bus resonators, the little resonators in the diagram there for the qubit coupling. So note, all this is just really electromagnetism. The quantum computer, means quantum computer guys, are slicing and dicing electromagnetic flows into extremely small units, which they then term quantized. And, and inherently at this extreme tiny scale, they're very unstable. Here you've got, notice on the board there, circuit quantization. Notice, see the LC circuit there, okay? And we're going to quantize that. Here's another example: quantum of charge, quantum of conductance, quantum of resistance, quantum of magnetic flux, okay? Um, so the gates, okay, in the quantum computer, remember we're still talking about Susskind's qubits in reality. So in a regular computer, the bits move through the logic gates there. So in that little picture there, I've got a 2 plus a 7, okay, which is a 0, 1, 0 and a 1, 1, 1. You move through the logic gates, you move those bits through the various and OR gates, and you'll come out add them together with, there'll be a 1, 0, 0, 1 at the bottom there, which will be a 9. Okay, so the bits move through the gates. But in a set of qubits with LC circuits, you can't move those things through the gates. So the gates move through the qubits. Gates are just energy pulses directed at the LC circuits and changing their state. Okay, as such. Okay, so you're directing these Josephson junction waves at your set of LC circuits. So my little picture there shows. So everything is 360-degree opposites to classic computing. So to even add 2 plus 3, well, we can't find any place where anyone can say how they can do that with a quantum computer. Again, I'm sort of going into this qubit thing because you'll find these physicists saying, well, really it's qubits and the whole universe is a quantum computer. Well, what I'm trying to point out here is not only is the idea that you're going to have qubits sitting on a black hole ridiculous, but the fact that you got a quantum computer at all is ridiculous. No one could even say how you would add 2 plus 3. We found one guy saying how he could add 1 plus 2, and because we're both old assembler programmers, we realized all he's doing is a big kludge of right shifting and left shifting of what would be called assembler bits to achieve adding 1 plus 2 in a so-called quantum computer. It's because you can get an idea, it's very, very difficult to represent a number in this system, plus, let alone add them, let alone sort the numbers, let alone compute balances for a general ledger. I mean, it's just not going to happen. It probably just can't be done, or no efficiency. That's why all you see in the quantum computing world is more new versions of qubits. Fine, because you don't have to do anything with the qubits. You can make it look like there's progress being made because there's yet a new qubit. But what to do with the qubits? You see, minor problem. They can't even add 2 plus 3 with the qubits. So all these classic speed comparisons with unstructured search. I'm looking for blue in that list there, which you can find people like Scott Aronson saying, theoretically, a quantum computer could do faster than a classic computer. It's all baloney. Searching, computing, sorting, computing balances, etc. Anyhow, I'm going to just skip that note. So get back to the main point. It was an aside, but it's an important aside. Bits or qubits cannot exist on event horizons of black holes, should black holes even exist. Thus will speak of appending one bit string to another, as such up there in my quantum cloud up there. Okay, given the classic architecture required for even this, I mean, it's an incredible architecture. One can get an idea from that picture I showed, just adding 7 plus 2 to get 9. The structure that's needed, rigid structure that doesn't move, isn't wobbly and disintegrating. This is insane that you're going to append one bit to another. I mean, just Uh, so it's absurd. So again, as I noted, his hot bit soup is its own parody. Yet the theoretical of it is to give black holes actual computer-like processes. Like how a black hole or the concrete universe could act as an information processor, as a CPU using bits or qubits, you could never concretely show that.
Yeah.
So it is clear in the concrete physical universe itself, unaided by human conception, that is a conception and its implementing apparatus that artificially maintains the value of a bit. Okay, in other words, in reality, you have all of that architecture, like those LC circuits, implementing the value of a bit, or in this case, a qubit. There's no possible way this concrete universe can implement information processing, quote unquote, whether via bits or qubits. This is all a la-la land.
Mm-hmm.
So is information bits? Is information in bits indestructible, eternal, forever? Well, it's just a faith. This is an unbelievably strange faith. It seems more like math derangement syndrome, MDS, as we'll call it. Already in 1896, Bergson was trying to forestall this. He saw mathematics continually being confused for the real, for the physics, as if mathematics possessed an ontological status. Bergson warned mathematics could at best be a descriptor of physical reality. It can form laws that describe aspects of this reality. For example, the invariance laws I showed on the coffee stirring, or F equal ma, or F equals minus kx for the spring, etc. But but he said the physical events, even the coffee stirring, infinitely overflows the mathematics, which is true.
Yeah.
In any case, bottom line, the holographic principle is not even close to a substitute for Bergson or Bohm. And if you think it is, the burden of proof is on you.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you wrapping this up? Because I just want to say this was great. I'm
I
very
think
happy.
this is probably the last of the Susskind and holographic principle. Yeah.
Okay.
Let, let's peek forward one more time. Yeah, we're going to go to reconciling Bergson with Bohm.
Yeah, well, let's just summarize what we just saw, because the reason I asked you to make sure we cover this with regard to a Bohm Bergson discussion is because if you go to the internet, or hell, if you go to the literature, I mean, it's just everywhere. The holographic principle of Susskind is everywhere, and what always has been bothering me, this is for years now, is, as you know, I'm more involved in the consciousness studies field. I'm not a physicist, I'm not a mathematician, so a lot of my research and reading takes place within the field of consciousness studies, or the nature of consciousness and whatnot. And I mean, more than a few, quote unquote, more than a few people writing in that realm tend to blur Bohm and the whole idea of information, for instance, as bits. I mean, Bohm, that's just not Bohm. And so many people are blurring Bohm and Susskind together like that, and it just drives me crazy. As you said, where's meaning? This is all symbolic language. What does this have to do with nature?
Well, in my metaphor, it's slamming tofu blocks on top of tofu blocks.
Right.
None of the tofu blocks have been actually examined. We just take general relativity. We just take black holes and information on black holes. We just take special relativity. We just take a bunch of quantum mechanics, throw it all together, and we have a cosmic view of the universe, none of which each of those tofu blocks has been examined.
Yeah.
Like I've
Yeah.
said to you ad nauseum now. If you look at a tofu block called special relativity, it dissolves into a pile of whatever tofu blocks collapse to if you heat them up and melt them.
Yeah. Well, hey, this
goo, I guess, a pile of goo. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, this was really, I'm glad we brought this out because, as I've said, people talk about information going back and forth from an explicate order, implicate order, but then they refer to that information as bits, and then they refer to the black holes, and it's just driving me crazy. So, well said, Steve. Thanks for bringing that up.
We got one more little phase here that we're going to try to do a little bit of reconciling with Bohm.
Yeah,
Now
let's do
the
this.
problem here is most of my reconciliation is what where Bohm would have to move to reckon where Bohm would have to move. Okay,
All right.
to because the hit with Bergson. But so he'd have to see the brain as a reconstructive wave,
Right.
you know, passing through the his holographic field, you know, and then for specific then to an aspect of the field, namely an image in the field. He'd have to see the whole movement as truly indivisible flow, in Bergson's concept of duration. He comes close to this in music, but again, he'd have to do away with the
Yeah.
quantum jumps,
That's it. Yeah. Yeah.
which is another. I mean, I don't know if you and I got a chance to talk about this, and you know, it would take us off to another topic we could have put in, namely, you know, the Schrodinger's
Yeah.
1952 paper where he just destroys the notion of quantum jumps. He doesn't leave anything left of it.
No, and Bohm,
People don't understand this, you know.
no, Bohm adhered to
Uh,
the quantum jumps notion. He did.
right. So, so I don't know if we talked about this, but he's trying to as he moves his as something moves his generative implicate order from state to state, he's trying to allow for that jump from state to state being a quantum jump,
Correct.
you know, and he goes through all that. I think we mentioned this, how he tries to say that I still have indivisible motion, but there can be quantum jumps in the indivisible motion, and like that becomes such a Zen koan, no one can deal with it. Okay, I think so. I think he needs to look at Schrödinger and realize that the quantum jump thing may be completely illusory. Um, I think he needs to see the whole movement as indeed filled with events described by Gibson's invariance laws.
Yeah.
Okay, again, remembering that even Gibson's invariance laws, as we noted, don't have a positive reality. They're not, you know, you're not generating these events via mathematical laws.
Yeah.
The events are simply being described by the mathematical laws to some degree. Um, I think he needs to understand Gibson's Bergson's notion of direct perception, because he's basically, as we noted, an indirect realist. He
Yeah.
still has the vision of the world in the head or in some mental space,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
perceptual space, as Yosha Bach would say, that is some completely unanalyzed, unspecifiable region that he could never truly come to grips with concretely. In other words, he's got to get the images in the brain out. You know, no images as a complex construction via Piaget's cognitive development, as we noted. Again, he's got to come to the realization that there's no experience stored in the brain. He's got to drop Prebrum or
Mhm.
whatever version of Prebrum as you and I discussed, because
Mhm.
I think Prebrum's got multiple versions that I don't know which is the
Right.
real Carl at some point.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think he ever leaves the notion, Prebrum, that experience is stored in the brain in some incredible holographic redistribution or distributed memory. I don't think he ever leaves that. Uh, but rather, we're retrieving experience from the four-dimensional holographic field. We're retrieving experience from the holo movement. It would have been just so interesting if Bohm would have known this version of Bergson and tried to
Oh
reconcile to
yeah,
that,
I
wouldn't
agree.
it?
Oh, that would have been, yeah, absolutely. And I tell you, I think I mentioned this to you. I was in a conference last year with Basil Hiley. Who else was in there? Some of the people who had worked with Bohm. And
Ray
I
Pete
huh? Yeah, Pete, no,
was
Pete passed away already at that
all
point.
right.
But
Okay.
anyway, I know it was Pavel Pilkinen. He was in there too. And
Okay. Oh yeah. All right.
I asked both of them. I said, well, I think I may have mentioned you. I said, I'm working with this guy, Stephen Robbins, and he's got this theory, Bergson had a holographic theory. And I said, hey, did Bohm read Bergson? And Basil Hiley got all excited. He goes, well, first he said, don't ever ask me who Bohm read, because whenever you ask Bohm that question, he'd say, oh, I didn't read him. And then you found out later that he had. Now, a lot of
Hmm.
Bohm's thinking was very original, but with regard to Bergson, Hiley said, well, he must have read Bergson because I did. And I'm sure I talked to him about Bergson. And I said, well, did he read Whitehead? He goes, oh, not really. A lot of people think that, he did, and there are so many similarities, but so it's kind of reverse of what the popular literature is saying. But anyway, my point is, uh, I, it would have been fascinating if he would have meditated more on Bergson, because he does not come out and discuss
Well,
his work at
well,
all.
and the insight that Bergson was indeed holographic
Yeah.
probably hadn't hit them either. I mean, they had,
No,
you
no,
know,
no, no, no. You're
there's
right.
only one guy pushing that around, and that's me. And
Yeah, you're right. No, nobody had gotten that. But another
right.
another point though, Steve, is, I think I pointed out to you, and then I think you went up and you did a little research yourself after I mentioned it to you. I said, Bohm was fascinated by Gibson, and in that book he wrote on special relativity, which came out in, like, I think mid '60s, '65 or something like that. He's got a whole appendix on for physics and perception, where he goes into Gibson. Now, I'm always curious. I'm just always thinking, what did he pull out of Gibson? He obviously saw a lot of value in what Gibson was doing, but he doesn't discuss them much, with regard to the particulars. So
Hmm.
that's another one of those unfortunate things. I think both
Right.
Bergson
And
and
and yeah. And again, like we've, I've also been trying to drive home to people, Gibson fits within Bergson's framework. It only makes sense in the holographic framework. Uh, you've got that brain resonating away to this structure of information in the external field. Somehow there's an image from that resonance, and that resonance is actually going to be taken as a reconstructive wave. Uh, he again, had he just had that key, it would have been so interesting.
yeah.
Uh, so anyhow, let's
Anyway, good job. I mean, again,
point. I got a couple more here, and so
oh,
one more little slide and one point F too. So understand the relationship between subject and object.
oh, this
Again, he has no concept. Bohm does that. This is even a problem. That subject versus object is even a problem. That you have to have something in your framework in your philosophy to deal with that.
can
And
I
again,
comment on
Bergson's
that?
notions.
He, I see where you're coming from, but I did want to say to you at some point, I'm glad it's coming up now. He did a lot on subject and object, particularly, again, here we go, with regard to his conversations or his dialogues with Krishnamurti. There was a
Oh,
hell of a
okay,
lot of meditating on.
right.
However, like I said yesterday in your presentation, I do see a tendency in Bohm to put a little more value on the order of space as opposed to the order of time. And I think that's your
Right,
point here, correct? I mean, uh,
right,
yeah,
right, right. Yeah, and of course, yeah, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, my corpus of Bohm work is Wholeness and Implicate Order and other stuff like Hiley and Pete wrote. But yeah, Krishnamurti, uh, that whole set of discourses is
you got to
your
check
area,
those out. You got
and
to check
so
those out. They're
you know,
really good.
I could understand where that would be an interesting. That would be a natural context for them to discuss those ruminations, shall we say? Yeah, I got one more point on that. The generative order. Okay, so we know Bohm has, as we discussed, what I would consider a spatial generative order,
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
symbolized by that spear, which is sort of a static order, creating uh, another order in that two-dimensional sphere where it looks like there's time. Of course, something's got to move that spear, and that's where we mentioned that Bohm comes a little bit incoherent. Just like the fish tank, uh, that is a dynamically changing inside the fish tank. There's dynamic change in that order that's being projected on a two-dimensional sphere or two-dimensional plane, namely two different views of the fish. I mean, you could freeze the fish tank, and then you could do the equivalent of the ball. You could have someone move the fish tank back and forth or rotate it around, and the fish would change. Okay. But then again, you're back to the infinite regress. Somebody's moving the fish tank, or somebody's sliding the fish tank back and forth or rotating it around, to get that change. He always ends up back at something that's generating time and something that's a continuous order. But anyhow, um, there is an order behind the expression of things in the material world in Bohm, but also, as we'll see, in Bergson. That is the expression from the inextensive in Bergson to the extended, or the near mathematical world. So in Bergson, this order is what he terms in creative evolution the willed or the vital order. And so you have the consciousness, the inextensive, relaxing, so to speak, to the extended world of matter, with the geometrical or mathematical order being applied over matter, or the abstract space as an underlying mathematics, geometry, calculus, as an ideal limit, never reached. Okay. And then the cloud there, the inextensive, that order, the best analogy that in Bergson would use it is like a Beethoven symphony. Before its expression in the physical world is a nice set of written out notes on a set of pieces of paper. But it is not Bohm's timeless spatial order, which he also, as I know, I think he thinks is probably characterized by mathematical law, the laws of physics, because as we noted, they have no positive reality. Again, they're just an ideal limit, never truly reached. So, and finally, this willed order of Bergson's is intrinsically tied to the motion of time. Time is a force. Mm-hmm. So that, to sum up, is kind of the difference between the two notions of order. And they're both there; they both have it, but one is intrinsically involving time and duration, and a more of a dynamic order than the other, the Bohm spatial, more static order that nevertheless is going to require something that
he needs a
moves it into expression. Yeah,
it falls back on a generative order, and don't forget about the quantum potential. I mean that. Yeah. So, anything else you wanted to say about this slide?
Nope. That's. I think I've wrung my little mental dish rag out here now on this whole thing.
Well, I think we did a pretty good job of fleshing out this. Well, I don't know what we're calling it. I guess we're calling it a Bergson-Bohm comparison. Because as I've said, I've just spent a heck of a lot of time meditating on trying to integrate the two. How do you integrate? Because there's such brilliance in Bergson, and so much of it would have been, as you just said, fascinating if Bohm would have been meditating on what Bergson was saying. So your last few slides did a great job of, these are the areas where only if, because there's such potential to integrate the two, and I think it all does boil down to that whole notion that time is creative itself. That's the part that seems to be the important, for me anyway. That's what I'm finding myself meditating on, is how does time create novelty?
Right. I mean, right. This is a major, profound subject that, as I noted several times, I haven't really. I didn't feel like it was really my mission in this life to dwell on.
I'll make it mine
or deal with very much.
Yeah. All right, Steve. This was great. Anything else you wanted to say with regard to concluding things, summarizing, wrapping things up?
No, it's. I think we can really sum it up as if only
Yeah,
If
yeah,
only Bohm had understood these aspects of Bergson, it would
yeah,
have been amazing. That
yeah.
would have been
I agree.
interesting.
Here's an observation, and I guess it's a question as well. Because again, as you know, I've been meditating a lot on this notion of pulsating matter and pulsating time, pulsating duration. Time is discontinuous as opposed to continuous. And I was wondering, Bohm himself, like you, felt that, science, quantum, for instance, quantum physics, needed to get to the bottom of what's actually taking place in the natural world, as opposed to just relying on mathematical equations as somehow generating cosmos. He was very against that. And he would say, by the way, apparently when he'd lecture at one place just using nothing but narration, talking about meaning, and then he'll go the next day or the same day to another university and use nothing but mathematics. And of course, when he would use nothing but mathematics on his board as he's lecturing, all the students just ate it up. But the other lecturer, not using the mathematical equations, people are like, oh, this is mushy. This, this is
Mm,
sloppy. So, but he dealt with that his whole life apparently. But my observation is this: it almost seems like quantum physics is, to use Bergson's language, it almost seems like it's a creation of the intellect. Everything's chopped up, and you wonder, what's real here. You just, like, for instance, the whole holographic principle put out by Susskind. um have you ever thought about that? Like, I know you have. I mean, you've done a pretty good job of pointing out some of the limitations of quantum physics, photons, and we didn't cover that either. The nature of a photon. But
right.
anyway, I've been thinking a lot about Bergson's distinction between intellect and intuition. And I, again, using Bohm as an example, Bohm obviously would have resonated with Bergson's notion of intuition. I mean, for him, reality is nothing but movement. But at the same time, in my opinion, he had a tendency to fall back more on using intellect. Um, and I think I've told you, when he would dialogue with Christian Murty would quiz him. I mean, there was something going on with time. As you just pointed out in this presentation, for Bohm, he had those notions of moments, those instants of time. And often Christian Murty would kind of catch him on that. Like, Bohm he always wanted to think and then see something. Christian Murty was, well, how about you see first and then you think? And by think, I mean intellectually think, intellect. So
Hmm.
that used to drive Christian Murty crazy. I gather it looked like, he'd always fall back on what's going to happen the next moment. And Christian Murty would say, why don't you see and find out? Now I'm paraphrasing here. Of course, Christian Murty would never speak to him like that, but you get my notion there. He really did view, as you're pointing out, view time with, he used moments as a way to understand it, instance in
Right.
time. And that became like an Achilles heel, I think, a little bit.
Right. I mean, if we took that to the Bergson case, Bergson would have been the epitome of what Krishnamurti was counseling Bohm to do. That is,
I think so. I think so.
Bergson started, his whole thing was this: wow, when you really look at your experience, the whole notion of abstract time and space dissolves into obviously a complete artificiality. Um, it's this description of experience that he has that describes duration that you wonder if he was on LSD or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but but uh, but yeah, it was the direct observation of experience, which is what he counseled. I mean, I mean, he would have probably been sitting right next to Krishnamurti counseling Bohm.
I can see
The
that.
two would have been speaking roughly the same. I think
Yeah, there's
probably
so many parallels.
probably you're better. An interesting thing about, did you tell me that you told me, yeah, Krishnamurti did sit with
Apparently,
lectures
yeah.
of Bergson.
When he was a young man in France, this appeared in a biography that came out fairly recently. Yeah, there's evidence that he sat and listened to Bergson back in France, and as a very young man. So yeah, that's crazy, because I see all kinds of parallels between what Bergson is saying, what Krishnamurti was saying, all kinds. It's there.
So we almost have Bergson talking to Krishnamurti. I mean,
Yeah.
Bergson in the form of Krishnamurti talking to Bohm.
Yeah,
One could
yeah,
wonder.
yeah. That's one way to look at it. Yeah, it's a good point. So, all right, man. Well, thanks, Steve.
Hey, it's been fun. We'll
You and I are
now,
weird guys. This is fun for me as well. So thank you for your
right.
time.
Yeah, it's been interesting. It's been generative. It's been a generative order here.
Yeah.
So,
All
all
right.
right.
Well, I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Okay.
I'm
And
gonna stop recording. We'll stop this off here.
I'll get
And
that off. Yep.
we'll just stay in touch.
We'll do.
All right. See you,
All
Steve.
right.
Bye
See you
bye.
later. Okay, bye-bye.